Welcome to the Tragedy and Hope Casual Cafe. It is October, it's the 3rd already. It's Wednesday. We are here in studio with Lisa Arbercheski and Kevin Cole, and on the handy-dandy Skype, let me bring it up over here on the desktop presenter. We got Tony Myers, and then Cody Hall, if he speaks. He'll pop up there at some point.
Hello.
You're gonna have to,
Good evening.
You're going to have to say a whole sentence. I think we learned that last episode. You weren't here for that class.
Yes, sir. Good evening, audience.
There you go. There you go. Now we got it in full effect. All right, so we are here in casual mode. We're going to have a group discussion. We don't really have an agenda. There's a couple things we'd like to get done tonight. We'd like to address Luis Almaguer's book list. That would be this book list. So coming up later, we'll be addressing this book list and what to read in what order, what might be a little bit more advanced, and what's good to start with. And other than that, we might have another guest on the lines, Skype line later. It might be a special guest. We'll see. There's a lot of emails that we have to respond to, and sometimes it's a little easier for us just to have a discussion about it rather than try to formulate, one-off responses that are really long. So that's part of what we do here. How you doing tonight, guys?
Good.
We're good.
Darby's going to be on the line with us.
Well.
I don't know if I mentioned that to you guys before the call. I actually just Skyped with her. She is going to be on the call with us.
Cool.
All right.
Good.
Cool.
Very good.
Then we'll get to talk about the Jesuits and King John. And I was thinking about it, when I was getting ready, because I thought we might talk about that email at some point tonight. And it occurred to me, I guess the first way I started it was, I have to explain to her why it's not the Jesuits. And then I thought about it for a little bit, and I was like, do you have a really good reason why it's not the Jesuits? I mean, they're all through everything. I mean, I've studied everything that she's probably seen and then some, because I started out 6-7 years ago looking at the Jesuits and thinking, wow, here's a secret society, and all these other secret societies are modeled on them. Cecil Rhodes talks about them. Theodor Herzl talks about the Jesuits. And so there's a lot of modeling on the Jesuits. So even if they're not in control, they must have had some sort of successful model. A successful model of some variety, because all these other guys are like, rather than come up with my own model, let's just use the model of the Jesuits. So,
well, what is their model? Well, we can talk about that later, I guess, when she gets on the phone. But
we can talk about whatever and whenever.
I'm glad that Darby brought that up there, because I think when I first met you, I was like, I'm going to read the Jesuits. I'm going to find out what they're all about. And you're like, I haven't really, I know you kept saying they pop up everywhere, but we're not, but some of the sources are very interesting, like Eric John Phelps and, who's the other? There's the guy who does. I can't believe I'm totally spacing on his name.
No, that's all right. I mean,
Secret Societies.
Yeah, Walter Veith, and that's
Walter
who
Veith.
Darby has been watching. And
yeah, I like him a lot. There's a lot of good information there.
Yeah.
There's a lot. There's something there. So yeah, I'm glad that she took up the torch and is moving forward with the Jesuit research, because that's one area that, like you said, it pops up everywhere, but.
Well, and then, what was out there for me to find at the beginning, I bumped into Eric John Phelps' work, and there's a lot of great history in his Vatican Assassins book. You can get it on ebook. I think there's a 3rd edition now. It's like 1,000, 1,200, 2,000 pages. It's a huge book. And when you separate the rhetoric from the substantial facts and evidence, there's still a lot to be studied there. And there definitely is a highly interwoven history of the Jesuits with politics, with economics, with education. I just don't have all the answers to it yet. But from our studies into, for instance, the Illuminati, and Kevin can talk to this too. Weishaupt is an ex-Jesuit. The Jesuits get banned in 1773. I'm pretty sure is when the Jesuits get banned in Bavaria. Now the Pope. The Vatican has some problems with the Jesuits. The Prussians have some problems with the Jesuits, and so it seems that either the Pope and the Prussian government put this ban on them purposely so that they can go underground and infiltrate Protestantism. There's that potential. I mean, reading Weishaupt's letters to Baron von Koenigsegg, it's very telling that here's one guy who thinks he's doing a great thing, number 2 in the Illuminati, and they're going to do all these great things, and he was kind of an idealist. And then there's Weishaupt, who's compartmentalizing everybody. And then when the person's no longer useful, he's just like, all right, we don't need you anymore. And we have all the other Areopagites that you've set up. And there's this whole education system that they were going to take over Freemasonry. And so he's like, well, we don't need you. We can do, attain these goals. And who was Weishaupt designing all this stuff for? Was it for himself? or was it his job as a Jesuit professor of canon law to create this, uber secret society that then was, there's a lot.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, or like, or was he just taking their model and trying to, say that man has this has the ability to become perfect, through reason, what they believed, like through the human reason, like they can create a perfect system. So instead of removed it from God and placed it in the hands of a few intellectuals, essentially. So it's like maybe he just wanted to model the Jesuit system, but really truly believed in a separate, like this, he's doing something different. Like he's trying to coax out like consciousness or reason or rationality, which is not what it was. I mean, it was very bastardized, but there's 1,000 variables there. It's very, very interesting history, illusional history.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think it's worth checking out on the community, the studies and teachings of the Society of Jesus at the time of its suppression from 1750 to 1773. This is a book by Michael Maynard, which discusses the period of time that you all are talking about with the suppression of the Jesuits. And in this book, the Jesuits themselves are lamenting that the University of Bonn has been taken out of Catholic control and has been brought under the tenets of Illuminism. Now, if you look at the graduates of Bonn, they're going forward, you'll find that the Institutes of Sciences, which are connected to the German Bund institutes that they were creating in these reading societies, this would go on to establish kind of the status quo for science coming out of the state. So these are the Jesuit
coming out of the state. That's huge.
Well,
that's huge.
Yeah, well, it's during that period of transition where this, if you check it out, you'll see that they're mentioning Pico of Mirandola, which is a throwback to I believe a Roman ruler. I'd have to look and make sure on that, but it's one of the original Areopagites, I believe, with the pseudonyms that they would use throughout that period of time. So there is quite a bit of evidence that the Jesuits were actually an opposing force of the Illuminati. But when you're talking about Adam Weishaupt and a lot of the compartmentalization that he oversaw through the pretty much what later becomes the Lancaster schooling system, because they're using the same Madras model of compartmentalization, from India and from, you can go to the back of Terry Mullinson's Perfectibilist book and look at the recommended writings of the Illuminati initiates. It gives you a book list that was discovered in the electorate when Carl Theodore took control of all the papers after the supposed lightning strike and the guy falling off the horse and losing all his paperwork and all that. So it is very, very fascinating. I think Weishaupt's own words have been pretty harsh against the Jesuits, but you'll also find where they sought to bring in ex-Jesuits. So
yeah, did he ever leave? I mean, because he had no problem working with other Jesuits, and he continued. Carnegie's writings keeps pointing back to, he's like, I think Weishaupt's a good guy. It's just that he's been brought up as a Catholic Jesuit, and so he's got this really cunning, evil side to him. And so, when someone like that is acting as a predator, and someone like Carnegie is just, going along with it, because he was interested in the mysteries, and he had been through this, and his family had been through Freemasonry, and so back then it was more about learning, for your self-edification, your own understanding of the world. I'm sorry, I left. I got to remember to turn the camera angles too. So the idea was Carnegie got caught up in the mystery of it, and all the symbolism and the cloaked teachings and these different types of ways to communicate.
And the utopian communism you find in his own books. I don't have the title handy, but in his own books and short stories, he would write about this futuristic society based on utopian communistic principles, which is a lot of what Weishaupt put forth. They wanted to create. That's
interesting.
They wanted to create an 8-year school system in which kids would be taken away from their parents because they saw traditional family, units as a threat to the order that they sought to establish. And so many of the people, like Rich said, were compartmentalized. There were, Mozart was a member of some of the Bonn I believe the Bonn Illuminati with Johann Herder. So you find that there are individuals within the Illuminati who may have had varying degrees of understanding about what was going on, and then there are others like Herder who invents the term zeitgeist, is responsible for creating our modern conception of nation states, and then later on turns against the idea of secret societies publicly and becomes involved in the counter-enlightenment. And then the counter-enlightenment is majorly influential on the English Romantic movement, which I'm going to be talking about a lot in the Trivium presentation coming up.
We have
Yeah.
we have Darby Mozelle on the line, and we're gonna try to add her to the Skype and see how this works. See how it goes on. Look at that.
Looks like it's working.
Darby, can you hear us?
Darby, can you hear us now?
Hello.
Hello,
We have a Darby.
Oh, I think maybe you gotta turn up your volume. Maybe I could hear you way tiny little bit. I can't quite make it out. You are there.
It's just really low.
Yeah, it's really low.
Yeah,
Very
really
low.
Her volume is always.
Turn it up, Texas.
All right.
It's a little bit better. You're getting there. Under Skype, under what's it? I'm on the wrong.
You go to tools.
Yeah, tools,
and you go to options. You can go to audio settings, and there you might be able to manually adjust your sound levels.
Yeah, hang on. My computer is just really lagging right now.
Oh, do you have Ustream open on the browser or something? Yeah, that might slow it down.
Actually, she sounds a little better now.
Yeah, you sound a little bit better there. Yeah.
A little bit better.
My system should be catching up in a second. And once it catches, we should be fine.
That's all right, because if anyone's watching this live, I mean, this is what you see live.
This is
And
what
if you wait a
happens.
day or two for the edited version, it won't have this.
Ah, very good. So is this better?
Much
Yes.
better.
Better?
Much better.
Definitely.
Hello.
Hi,
Very
hi. Thank you guys. How
Hi,
exciting
Darby.
for
Hello, Darby.
Hi.
I gotta shut off Outlook. That's way annoying right there. Ding.
Well, I'm so excited that you guys decided to touch on this topic. But because, you know, I mean, there is no way I know the names and books and so forth like you guys do. Basically, from leapfrogging through, you know, I mean, even though the Jesuits, you know, are an integral part, I mean, basically, what, you know, they have pretty much taken over our entire political system from what I've seen. And if you look at the current world leaders and the people on the stage, and all that traces back to you know, the Catholic Church. And you know, when you look at the Pope, which most of us don't, but when you look at the Pope, he basically has the right to put down
That's right.
that he wants, and he is also the one that's been consistently calling for the New World Order. And if you look at the type of system that they're wanting us to live under, it's basically the feudal system, which basically, from what little I've dug into, actually comes from the Catholic Church. And if you look into the doctrines of the Catholic Church, you begin to see scary parallels between, you know, how these things function. I'm a little nervous, so you'll have to forgive me.
You're doing
I was
good.
going to say,
Yeah, doing great.
there's nothing to be nervous about. You're just talking about the ruling power structure of the world and trying to figure it out. It's not scary at all.
Well, I think the all-seeing eye is more or less located at the Vatican. But seriously, no, from looking at this, all the intelligence agencies, you know, I mean, all the numbers, and you know, some of the research that I ran into said that basically all of those are controlled through the Father General, and that's where the real power lies, because the White Pope is the figurehead, and if there's ever any disagreement between the two, then the General is the one that his is the word. And the way he does it, what they have done is they have, from what I've put together, they have divided the world into 10 regions, which you can find maps for that. And he has a general over each of those regions that report directly to him. And all these guys, the thing is all these guys, especially the higher up they get, they're always in the presence of other guys who are in the orders too. That way, nothing ever has a chance to, go wrong or get screwed up. But what I think is interesting is these guys are just trying to pass off the prison onto us. Because if we think we got it bad, the scrutiny that they're under and that they put themselves under, is just amazing. But I think what we're living through here is just the roll down of what they have to live through. And when you look at a lot of them, apparently you've got generations of people of these families that are literally mind controlled and abused, and it's literally like an army of zombies, kind of. Anyway, that's kind of my take.
All right, so that was very well stated, and I can understand where you're coming from. The question I have before we have discussion would be, if you could name 2 or 3 researchers who you've encountered that have purveyed this Jesuit conspiracy to you, who would you refer to besides Walter Veith? Because I know you watched Walter Veith.
Right, James Montgomery, and some man calling himself the Informer. And then some guy, he's the one, Phelps, he's the one that wrote that book.
Yeah.
And his stuff is really nasty to listen to because he's really got some crazy ideas. But, you go where the is.
Well, he's a racist.
Right.
Okay.
He's blatantly a racist.
Yeah. I have,
That's where he loses me.
Yeah, he loses me when
right.
he deals the Israeli diamonds. He loses me with the racism. He loses me with the Calvinism, justified sinning. He loses me with
White
possibly the, he was in the Air Force. He was in a biker gang, and then all of a sudden he's a holy rolling Christian. And those were some of the things. Oh yeah, dude. He's not always been like that. And so
Well, a lot of
I don't really have an issue with any of those things. I really just have an issue with the racism.
Right. So those aren't ad hominem attacks. Those are just observations of things that, bring questions to my mind.
And that's Eric John Phelps, right?
Sure.
Advocating for a African American settlement somewhere near Michigan to segregate.
Basically,
resegregation.
his whole theory is that African Americans should be sent back to Africa, and I can't stand by that.
Wow, that's
his
nuts.
father was a member of the KKK, so not that I'm excusing it, but I'm just saying he probably hasn't wandered very far from his early upbringing.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good observation.
That is good. Kevin's looking it up right now, see if there's anything on that. I bumped into a guy. It's an interesting non sequitur, so it's not connected, but I was studying motion pictures and cinematography, and there's this guy who wrote a book on the history of motion pictures, and he was in charge of motion picture ratings for 30 years. His name is Martin Quigley Jr. He went to Georgetown. So he fit into this whole mold that Darby was talking about, and I was like, is he like Carol Quigley's cousin? Because and he was in the OSS. He worked for the OSS for years, and in his Wikipedia page, if you look it up, Martin Quigley Jr., he is listed as like a publisher, author, and a spy. Like, you don't see very many people listed as a spy just openly.
Right.
Here it is. Let me. I can pull it up over here too. So
During World War II, Quigley Jr., Martin Quigley Jr., that is, used his publishing position as a cover to gather intelligence in Ireland, where many influential people favored the Axis, and in Italy on behalf of the United States Office of Strategic Services, or OSS.
Interesting.
It says publisher, politician, author, and spy right here.
Well, and on to your Hollywood thing, and I'm sorry, I'm not as meticulous as you guys, but I guess I'll have to change that. But one of the things that I was running across was Hollywood is controlled, by the Jewish influence, and there's you can't deny that there's that big crowd. But what I also ran across, and I can't remember, I'm so sorry, but that there is an thing like that, that every movie from every studio, that it has to go through that office, and that office answers to, you guessed it, the Vatican.
All right. I would say that sounds like crazy racist talk, Darby. Except I already I researched this line. You can get An Empire of Their Own: How the Jews Invented Hollywood by Neil Gabler, who is Jewish.
Amazing.
So what you have to understand is there is a whole literature on
really
Jewish history in America. You can watch this one. You won't believe it.
What about that? What about that movie about the Rothschilds in 1929, I believe, or maybe not 1929? Probably just associating that with the stock market crash, but it was in the early 20th century that pretty much outlined the history of how they came into their fortune, and it's quite telling. I'm trying to draw the name in my head right now. It's black and white film. It won awards.
You're talking about the House of Rothschild from 1934? That's on here
1930,
too.
yeah.
Yeah, Rich had me watch some of that when I was last up there.
Well,
Fascinating.
another couple of reasons that I feel like there's something, you know, hugely to the Jesuits and the Catholic influence is that the Catholic Church, I think, you know, is probably the wealthiest entity on the planet. The other thing is again, all these leaders basically pay homage to him. And if you look over the history of the wars, you know, and I've put lots of links in there, but I can't remember exactly which ones at the moment. But if you look at that, then if you divide it up into the so-called, you know, non-Catholic, and then our Protestant versus the Catholic nations, you know, it seems like those are the ones that are always being attacked. So it just seems to me that what we think are all these, you know, wars for oil, or, you know, wars because they don't have a central bank or whatever. I mean, those things may fit in for sure, but it seems to me like it, you know, it forwards that you know, one world agenda,
which is controlling,
you know,
resources. If they have all the resources and have had all the resources for like over,
but it's resources they're interested in, as they're trying to, you know, kill off an ideology, you know, and you look and you can see where Islam, you know, looks like that Muhammad's mother was Roman Catholic, and that was, you know, again, that was a construct, you know. So, I mean, the religious thing is a big angle to us, but we're in the minority when it comes to that, because the whole world is up in arms about that, you know.
Well, there might be something to all that, but let's see. Let me go back to that shot. Okay, so there's something to all of this. That's the problem. There's a little bit of truth in all these different angles because all the angles overlap. And so what I've found through my experience is that you, like, when Lisa said, Darby sent this email about the Jesuits, I said, great, let's see what she thinks in 2 years, if she still thinks it's just the Jesuits, because it's easy when you enter down any of these avenues to think, well, it's just this, because it's overwhelming, right? It's like you're walking down a tunnel and you're surrounded by all this Jesuit Catholic Church activity through history. And yes, they do have, they have the power over the divine right of kings. Like all the kings in Europe, all the kings that we know about in Western history, they are all coming, for the most part, from, you know, the Catholic Church saying we have the right to give you a crown and you have the right to rule over people.
Right.
There's also the aspect that Jan's been fleshing out with Joseph Atwill, because in Caesar's Messiah, the whole premise is the Romans were fighting the Jews, and the Jews were very militant and very revolutionary, and so they created this type of literature, a typology that would contain this, you know, mirrors of their past literature, but in a new form that was pacifistic. And so
that's exactly like their old text, but, you know, just turn it upside down. It's amazing.
And this ties in,
that's really fascinating history,
right? And it ties in with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so you can't just look at the last 500 years, which, you know, Phelps, I don't want to say anything about him personally because I don't care about him personally. I only care about the research and trying to figure out what's going on. And to negate so many glaring contradictions and then to assume a perspective of Calvin Protestantism. I mean, his description of his own religiosity is like 2 or 3 lines on the title page of his book. He tells you exactly what type of racist Calvinist he is, and et cetera, right? Because not all Calvinists are like that. So there are all these layers that you have to peel back. Now, Walter Veith is I watched all his stuff years ago, and I've continued to watch stuff as he puts it out, because like he'll stand up there in the beginning. For instance, The Secret of Secret Societies, The Secret History of the Jesuits. Like he has several presentations, and he'll start out and say,
Jesus
right, I remember him.
Right. So he says, everything I'm going to say tonight is not my opinion. I'm only going to read quotes. And so he'll spend the whole presentation reading quotes, and they are some very interesting and provocative quotes.
Right.
Does he leave out some contextual history? Does he have some blind spots? Yes, but that's our job to, as researchers, sift through that, find the validity. Like, for instance, what brought this all to a head was somebody was made. I found that video of the girl who found that all the presidents are related to King John.
Right.
And I happen to know who King John of Lackland, because he lacked land, right? That's what they called him back then. So I happen to know who this character was, and I was like, holy shit. All the presidents are related back to King John. And what is King John famous for? King John was famous for creating a contract with the Vatican. And then the contract basically said, if you renege on this contract, we will own the crown in perpetuity. You will lose like your whole family legacy. And he reneged on the contract. And so I was looking for this reference, and I couldn't find it. And I was trying to think, and I was going back through my notes, my daily notes, to see when I had reviewed this presentation. And finally, I thought, I can just use that search window in the community. And sure enough, I found it because the presentation was called The Beamable Sustainable Princes, right? And it's a line from Joan Vion's book on Agenda 21, which he doesn't do a very good job of crediting her on. But and so the title doesn't really have anything to do with King John or any of the things that I was searching on the internet to try to find this information.
It's on Fordham's website, Fordham University. That's where I found all the references that I believe he was referring to.
And for those of you playing at home, if you don't know who the Fordham people are, that's the Jesuits. And those are the Jesuits. That's a Jesuit university. That's one of their nests, their strongholds. And they'll do that in movies. Like there'll be a character who's supposed to be a really cunning lawyer, and they'll be like, he graduated from Fordham, right? So they'll drop this for people who know it in through the movie. So
it's like Braveheart and Liberal Education.
I highly recommend checking out the documentary on, who is it, Casey? Is that on Netflix that we watched?
Oh, right.
Was it Colby?
William Colby.
Oh, right.
The man,
Searching for my
the man nobody knew. Kevin will look it up right now. But James Pilato from Media Monarchy had watched it, and he sends it to me, and he's like, this might be an interesting navigating Netflix. And I was like, awesome. And I started to watch it one day, and I was tired. I was trying to take a nap, and I took a nap, so I didn't see it. So a couple weeks ago, I turned it on, but then I had to leave the room to get downstairs and work in the studio. And Kevin watched it, and he's like, this is a fascinating documentary, because basically it's William Colby, who was a CIA director during the Cold War. He died mysteriously. Now, he's a master boatsman, and he dies canoeing. Like, it's a very suspicious thing. His body's never found, right? And he was actually working with John DeCamp at the time, investigating the Franklin cover-up, which I don't think they talk about in the documentary, does he? No, he doesn't.
And the documentary the full title is The Man Nobody Knew, In Search of My Father, CIA Spy Master. William Colby.
Mm-hmm. Right, so his kid's basically like, I don't know my dad, and so he goes around interviewing all the dudes his dad worked with, which is a really interesting character sketch of all these other characters. And I had read his biography of one of Wild Bill Donovan's children. Let me look and see it. It's a yellow-spined book. I think it's out in the living room.
Yeah, maybe it's been on my list to watch.
It's in the living room. Now, it's a yellow book. If you look up on Amazon, so it's, I forget. It's Wild Bill Donovan's son. I don't remember his first name. It might be the same thing. Anyway, Donovan had like 12 kids with like 5 different families, and like had all this covert stuff going on. And so this kid grows up and he has no idea who his dad was. So he's telling the story that he's been told in this book. And I'm like, this is so ludicrous, because I've read all these about his dad.
Wild Bill? Are you? Oh my goodness! Because Wild Bill, yeah, because he was the head of the Rainbow Division. I think, during
he has a
First
long
World
history.
War, and he destroyed his entire division. I mean, there's barely anyone left because he refused to take orders, and just, I mean, it was a bad situation.
So
they were famous because of how many men they lost in the war, and he was the leader of that division.
and then he got promoted. He didn't get fired.
That's right.
That was his rise to power, the Rainbow Division. There's a whole bunch of sacrificial stuff that goes on with the military. So Donovan excels at this. He later not only starts OSS and CIA and all this stuff, but he's the Pope's man. Like Phelps does have a picture of Dulles in there, and especially Wild Bill Donovan getting some medal from the Pope or something or other. And when you look into it, yes, there definitely is a military and political and economic history. Now, who was claiming that the Jesuits are the Rothschilds are the Jesuits bankers? Who was that dude last week that we were watching that presentation?
Rothschilds are the Jesuit bankers, or the Jesuits are the Rothschilds? Oh wait, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Was it the Red Ice Radio?
Sure it was.
Oh, okay, yeah.
With
You're right. Yeah, so there's a recent Red Ice interview, and Henrik's interviewing this dude, and he's basically saying a whole bunch of things that are historically true, but his argument is that the Jesuits used the Rothschilds to control money for them, and that may be true. That might be true. I just have not found the literature on that yet. I can't find any primary sources on that, and until I can find the primary sources of where that information comes from, I have to continue with what the existing information is, which is the Rothschild banking empire exists, and there's 20-plus books that'll tell you about it written in their own words. The Warburgs exist. They tell you in their own words that they have worked for the Rothschilds for hundreds of years. So these are the bankers in their own words talking to each other, so it's not so much a propaganda for the public, because we're not supposed to gather and read these books like we do. So
it's tough to decipher, though, because there is something there. I mean, the Catholic Church is really about amalgamating the world's resources at a certain time and kind of controlling them under that one universal system, which, I don't know how they went about rolling it out, but it wouldn't surprise. There's definitely a connection in history to, obviously, the Catholic Church because of the power they have had for over 2,000 years. I mean, obviously, maybe they don't have the power they once had or have delineated it to other groups or other ideologies or people, but just the amount of wealth and the amount of pillaging and civilizations and whatnot. I mean, if you walk through the Vatican museums, you'll see relics of, for example, from ancient Egypt, which is very strange, and you'll see very, very strange relics from all different countries and cultures, really. And so it's it's like they were the first plunderers of the world, but they really weren't. That goes back to there's something with the Joseph Atwill story there. That's where I'm very interested in what will come out of that. But
go ahead, Darby.
Well, James Montgomery, and he didn't offer any references. And he said, he said, why is it that the Vatican was loaning money to the Rothschilds at 6%, and then shortly after that, they had this big meteoric rise. So and that's just a question.
Yeah, I'd say there's no doubt that the Jesuits and the Catholic Church have had an immense influence, and they still have an immense influence on their followers. Starting off with number one, you can look into the Carroll brothers and the selling of land that had appropriated Washington, D.C., how Georgetown University was able to be set up there. This all took place around the creation of the boundaries for Washington, D.C. Number two,
and the Jesuits in South America.
Yeah, absolutely. And number two, for anybody looking for more information on King John and that whole situation, another good place to look for that is in the Underground History of American Education on the Daughters of the Barons of Runnymede, where John Taylor Gatto fleshes a lot of that out. Number three, I was going through my personal brain, entered in Martin Quigley, and realized that I had him in there connected to the Motion Picture Association, because the Motion Picture Production Code from, I believe, the first one
1930 to 1960 is when he was there.
Yeah, and this was in 1929, a lay Catholic, Martin Quigley, editor of the Motion Picture Herald, a prominent trade paper, and Jesuit priest Father Daniel A. Lord created a code of standards which Hayes liked immensely. So the Hayes Code on motion picture censorship was originally influenced by Martin Quigley and a Jesuit priest. And you can understand why they would want to control certain moral aspects of what's going on in society. I mean, because
they want to control or change or manipulate your values and your attitude and your beliefs, etc. Right?
Sure.
It's the same thing they want to do with the school system.
Yeah, it's a value.
And that's why it makes it logical for somebody like Walter Veith, who, what's his religious denomination, and
he's Protestant.
How does that
South African?
How does that pertain to the threat and the fear of a counter Reformation? There's a lot.
Hollywood is a powerful medium of control, so you could see why those people would want influence over it. Same as the school system, another powerful medium of influencing young minds, etc. I mean, the same is really true of religion. I would say of all religions, because they're really control systems. I mean, they're there to pacify.
All right, so not to cut you off, Cody, I'll just say this and then you can jump in. We've been studying cinematography because we're seeking to communicate with an audience that is so tied up in their virtual world on their TVs that I think that's the way to break through. And so in studying the history of film and the history of cinema, as I mentioned before, is it Sergei Eisenstein that does the cream refining that we watched this morning? Anyway, my point was I wanted to show Lisa how advanced the German and Russian filmmakers were back in the 20s, because we had just watched the history of U.S. cinema and Hollywood and this sort of thing. And so the avant-garde cutting in the 60s that only came in the 70s, these changes in lighting, these changes.
It's the same with music, too.
Right.
It's the same with music, yeah.
The changes in storytelling that were so pushed off into the 70s and 80s, they were doing that in the 20s. And so they had to be destroyed. Both Soviet Russia, like Russia, before it was Sovietized, was already in the film industry, and so was Germany, because they had produced Metropolis and these types of films, right? So there were people out there chipping away at the world order and getting people to think. And so I just noticed that, juxtaposed to the history of cinema and what happened to those countries politically, that somebody did want a monopoly. Somebody did want a monopoly on world media and especially the United States, and to be able to harness us. Our question is who? Who's doing that? How are they doing it? Why are they doing it? How can we escape it? Right? These are the types of things we're covering. What did you have to say, Cody?
Just as a rhetorical side note with Hollywood and the whole Catholic type thing, Holywood.
I thought I heard Darby say that earlier, and I was like, that's clever.
It's interesting because we did have 3D technology. They knew about the optics and how to manipulate camera angles to create like a 3D projection, like back in the 20s, I'm pretty sure, 1920s, the early 20th century, and we potentially had wireless energy, So there was a lot of technology back then, just saying. And so it's quite an interesting history. What happened with the scientists and their political dealings, especially around the turn of the century.
Yeah, and
going into the 1900s.
And it's no coincidence that it's coming out of people from Germany, where a lot of the research methods that developed there were, first and foremost in the world, because they were the first ones to really secularize the theological principles, and so they had a head start on trying to re-examine these liberal arts systems and the science of the day, because they're doing it from a more
once they secularize it, like you can kind of control it under the auspices of the state and the state's own ideology, and get it away from the church, and therefore you can kind of use the engineering to what the state needs done for good or bad. Whether it's war or whether it's new building and architecture, how new information systems for transferring information quicker.
Right. And notice what you're talking about there, and what you're saying is that it's an observer status. It changed the controller and the observer. So then you get into conversations about cybernetics, where people understood that this was a science of governing and that there was an organic unity to be maintained.
And what did they mean by organic unity? G. Stanley Hall said organic unity is evolution, and evolution is eugenics as they apply it to us, because they're not trying to change themselves. They spend all their time breeding us like we're dogs or horses or cattle or something like that, So
well, they want to do away. There's so many threads of this, which I hope to try to flesh out some of this in my presentation. But there are many threads coming from the German idealistic movements onto Victorian England, where people like Matthew Arnold and Samuel Coleridge even earlier, and then I.A. Richards later, all buy into this idea of an organic unity, going back to Plato and Aristotle's great chain of being. And the great chain of being is supposed to be this cosmic connection that creates a hierarchical divide across all species, with man on top because of his obvious faculties at the time. But it's
their
really
rationalistic faculties. They're trying to, like,
And then Darwin divided up
advance
man, right?
rationality.
Into a hierarchy.
It's amazing because it's like the infinite perfectibility of man is through the human reason. Like, you know, they're still taking that mind first ideological principles and like, you know, and then applying these theories or making everyone fit into these kind of boxes they draw up in their mind, whether or not it's Plato's ideal world of forms, which is just like the beginning ideology itself.
Systems.
In a way.
It's
systems, right.
Right.
But not self-organizing, not that people just collect. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I just think that with all the resources that the Catholic Church has had over the centuries, that would be a magnet for you know, all kinds of bad people and
Gangsters.
and so forth. Yeah.
Pedophiles.
Huge leap of the imagination for me to see that you know, the worst of the worst would head for that place, you know. And that's basically just my unsubstantiated conclusion.
Yeah, I really think there's a lot of substance there, because if you look at it, you know, the Jesuits in the Catholic Church, for better or for worse, and all of our positions here, were holders of a lot of this history for many, many years. You know, so it comes down to another principle of nationalism. You can look it up. It's called romantic nationalism, and this is something that the Roman Catholic Church had embraced prior to this word even describing this process. But it really comes down to trying to spread a cardinal and ordinal structure across the globe that creates children for you ideologically. So whether or not it's a direct temporal control where somebody's beating a stick behind the white pope and saying, you know, you do this and that, I don't know. But I think the philosophical control and the educational control, when you look at the trivium and the quadrivium being introduced into Peru and into Virginia, not by the Protestants, by the Jesuits, because they had their own system of education, which was known as the Ratio Studiorum. And not to spoil it, but this is exactly what Thomas Jefferson and Noah Webster and James Madison fought against. And I'll be breaking out a lot of those
Kevin,
sources.
Not to cut you off, but I just have to say this, like, it's still going on today. Like, for example, my friend who kind of had a falling out and kind of lost his mind and went to a Catholic organization called the Legionnaires of Christ, which is actually in Connecticut, somewhere in the forests of Connecticut. When I last studying the trivium, this isn't your standard Catholic organization. It's like an 11-year process of becoming a monk. You're cloistered for quite a while. You can't see your family. You can talk to people by phone and sometimes communicate by email, but you're not allowed to see them face to face unless they come to you, in which case it's like they can only allow you during retreats. So they're trying to get other people to join to their community. So, but they were very, very intensely studying the trivium, and of course, exactly like the history you've uncovered, Kevin. Not to give too many spoilers, just the whole Godhead concept, like studying for everything, the Word first, God's first, definitions first, then go into logic. That's exactly what they were doing. It's fascinating because you're spot on.
Yeah.
At least up into our own day, they're still doing that. So.
Yeah, and what I've read just recently is that when they introduced the educational systems into Peru, they purposely sought to leave out high philosophy and theology from the masses. So they also, in many circumstances, put the quadrivium before the trivium. And I'm going to show how the College of William and Mary had their curriculum changed by a well-known figure. So this is not a in my opinion, there may be some temporal control with regard to people that believe in the Catholic Church and give their money to them, because that's exactly what's going on. But as far as how they're controlling these other aspects of geopolitics, you would have to look into the committees that they have connected to the United Nations and the different peace committees controlled by religious organizations in the United States. So there, it's hard for me to, and it would be irresponsible for me to say that temporal control exists without a direct chain of evidence to see that. But the philosophical side, when you look at how how England broke with the Roman Catholic Church and created this new unity of consciousness and Anglicanism, and then how the United States broke with Great Britain and that created this new chain of consciousness, and then when the empire is about to go down, they say we need to change our concept of nationalism so we can live on through this Anglo-Saxon unity, and they wanted to, they want to spread the English language. They want to facilitate their educational principles across the globe. But the Jesuits in the Catholic Church can claim the same thing. They can say, well, Henry, you may have got your way and married, who you wanted to, but, we still control the taxes in your region. We still,
control the minds.
Absolutely. And yeah, and many
values,
and many of the people in England
life.
fought against, they were very much against breaking with Rome, with the Catholic Church. So,
all right, so there's a lot to dig. There's a lot to dig into. What I wanted to do was kind of frame it up, because it's like there is this argument of the British Empire. There's this argument of the Vatican. But what existed before the Vatican? The Roman Empire. And so, and that's the origin of Christianity. That's so there's a whole bunch of archaeological evidence to dig into. So what I want to do is I don't know if I'm going to play the whole thing, but I want to show you the trailer from Joseph Atwell's movie Caesar's Messiah. I don't think it's made yet. They just did a new trailer a couple months ago, but I looked at the old trailer.
It came out. It should have just came out. It was like a week. The trailer came out, but I'm pretty sure because I watched the trailer like a week or two ago, and I thought it said like in a week it's coming out. The book, the documentary. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it should be available, but I haven't checked it since then. So let me just check.
All right,
but go ahead.
So my point is, there's a recent trailer, and I thought that was good, but I thought the old trailer did a better job of like setting the stage because I don't know. I'm just going to show it to you so you can see what I'm talking about. But I think there's something there. I'm not quite sure what it all is, but we'll see. You guys on Skype might not be able to hear this, but everyone else will, hopefully.
Individuals have a right to the truth. The Caesars committed a crime against consciousness. They reached into the minds of their subjects and planted false concepts to make them easier to control. And those crimes are not only historical, but are ongoing. Religions in Rome were not independent theological entities, but Roman bureaucracies whose purpose was crowd control. Historian Josephus recorded that what most propelled the Jews to rebel was their belief in the coming of a Messiah. The real Messianic movement was, of course, militaristic. Rome had conquered the region, had a puppet family, the Herods, that were ruling Judea for them. They were taxing everything that moved. The Roman Caesars insisted that the Jews worship them as gods. There was a rebellion led by the Messianic movement. To crush it, Rome sent its best general, Vespasian. He was from a powerful patrician family, the Flavians, that was determined to rule the Roman Empire. Vespasian knew how to destroy a religion. He had spent the last decade in Brittany and Gaul with his elder son Titus exterminating the Druids. They were scrubbed. When the Jews rebelled, Nero turned to Vespasian and said, "Go down and clean this mess up." And Vespasian went down there, began bringing his son, Titus, and they waged war against the Messianic movement. In the middle of the war, Vespasian returned to Rome to seize the throne. He left his son Titus at Jerusalem to finish with the destruction of the Messianic movement and to raise the temple. Once his father had seized the throne, Titus saw himself as the Son of God and demanded that the Jews call him Lord. They refused, even after being tortured. The Jews were looking for someone who had the same power that David did. They could see that when military opponents were overwhelming Israel, that God would send them someone who had his power. You couldn't lose if you had the Messiah with you. Flavians and their intellectuals, many of whom were Jewish, worked to produce a new version of the Torah which had a Messiah that was pacifistic, asked people to turn the other cheek, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. The Roman Messiah. Character in the Gospels, Jesus Christ. Jesus means Savior. Christ is Greek for the Messiah. They definitely wanted this character to be seen as having been a Messiah and having existed in the past, so he'd already come rather than for him to show up, and that he was killed by the Jews. With Christianity, the Flavians hoped to create docile, tax-paying subjects who did not need a standing army over them to maintain order. In the future, Christians would pay their taxes to the pontiff, which was simply another name for Caesar. The Flavians were proud of their invention and encoded into the Gospels a message to posterity. All of the events of Jesus' ministry were created as symbolic representations of the Flavians' military campaign through Judea. Jesus begins his ministry at the Sea of Galilee, where he tells his disciples that if they follow him, they will become fishers of men. That story was based on Titus's military victory at the Sea of Galilee, where he sank the Jews' fishing fleet and fished for men. We will show that the events of Jesus' ministry occur at the same location and in the same sequence as the events of Titus's military campaign that they represent. The Gospels were deliberately linked to the history of the Flavian military campaign written by Josephus. The Flavians intended for posterity to eventually realize that they had created Christianity. This is not a theory.
I didn't mean to cut it like that. I just meant to go off the full screen. So now that I ruined it, let me bring it back over here. Go like that. And now we are back. All right, so Darby and Tony. Tony, you probably watched it on the YouTube. Wow. Oh,
Sorry.
that's all right.
Sorry.
It's all right. It's good to be on mute while we're watching videos. You guys probably, Tony, you probably watched it. Darby, I don't know that you saw or heard what we just watched, but basically what that trailer is laying out, I don't think it's stylistic.
It's way better too, dude. Way better.
Yeah, I don't think it's stylistically better. But it's a better representation of Atwell's complex yet reasonable historiography is what I was trying to say. Sometimes, what is it? It's late at night already. Days fly by when you work all day, and then you gotta communicate at night and use your words still. So what he lays out, I think, is legible if you have enough contextual history to understand some of the things at play. Now, I'm not quite sure how it would fit in with Jan's work with the Holy Mushroom, from Jan's perspective.
There's something there.
Yeah, I haven't asked him how those two things mesh together. But from my perspective, it seems that if the Caesars were ruling and they had slaves and they were, taking in theogens, for lack of a better term that Carl Ruck didn't make up, if they were tripping on mushrooms and the slaves were having to service their masters during these trips, eventually I think they would understand that the reason that those people were in control was because they had an expanded mindset. They were working from a bigger palette, if you will. And they probably took some of those mushrooms, went underground in those catacombs, and started communing with Jesus, having this experience that they called Jesus. And I think that that would be a good reason to create the Gospels of pacifism and say, turn the other cheek, because you would have had a bunch of rebellious slaves who now had the same knowledge set, or at least an access to these other perspectives. That
the rebellion is like a mind first. So like it's first like freeing their mind, or like
right.
Finding out ways to communicate that. So paradoxically, as Terence McKenna used to say, I don't know if that word's taboo, but paradoxically, it makes one more intelligent. Paradoxically, so it's a seeming contradiction.
Terence McKenna
there.
Could be a taboo term. We'll have to see how those FOIA requests turn out. Well, yeah, I'm sure Jan will let us know, because I want to see what Cecil B. DeMille's FOIA request turns up. I mean, those are good examples of how to ask for information that's out there that could be very relevant. Yeah. And
that's true.
So
that's true.
There are all these angles into history. History is complex, but if you try really hard, you can't understand it. And when you look at the symbolism of the Phrygian cap that was worn by emancipated Christian slaves, and its symbolism to the mushroom all the way up through the Morgan silver dollars, the seal of the United States Army, the seal of the Senate, the back of George Washington's chair that he was at the Constitutional Convention has a mushroom on. Like, so there's a bunch of symbolism.
How about the French Revolution and the Illuminati and the Jacobin influence? Like, right.
It's
all over a lot of revolutions.
It's a Phrygian cap on a stick, which is a liberty cap, which is a mushroom, which gives you cognitive liberty if you use a method of critical thinking.
Nicaragua's monetary coinage also has it.
Oh, wow. That's interesting, because then that's a completely different area of the world. Yeah. It's a Nicaragua as well. So, yeah, it just shows, like, the kind of confluence or interest. Like, they obviously mark their generalizations by symbols.
Right.
Right.
So you can learn the symbols because they leave their trails of symbols to recruit others. Like, there's a ton of Phrygian caps inside the Library of Congress. In the Library of Congress, that's all Rosicrucian symbolism that's in there. So there's a difference and there's a commonality between the Rosicrucian symbolism, the Freemasonic symbolism, and so to get back to the conversation about the Jesuits and the Vatican, you have this group called the Templars, and they go over the Middle East and they get some sort of knowledge, I'm guessing, and some sort of monetary wealth, because when they come back, they're the new kids on the block. They are in charge. They're competition for the Vatican. And at a certain point, the Vatican gets together with their kings, and they say, no more Templars. Now, the Templars run off to Scotland, and you've got Rosslyn Castle, you've got Freemasonry, you've got compulsory schooling jumping out of there, right? And so you've got Freemasonry, which is now out there back then in the 1700s. And so it seems that since the Vatican went against the Templars, and the Templars seem to have spawned Freemasonry, that the Jesuits would go underground, create the Illuminati to take over the Freemasonry, and then they would use their own Knights of Malta as their military order, which is, it seems to be the Knights of Malta, Knights of Rhodes, Knights of St. John, all the same group through history. Very interesting history on that group. But they seem to have been competition for the Templars. Now, the Knights of Malta, they roll with the Knights Hospitallers, right? And they all use the red cross on the white field, which is the flag of England. And what is the other flag? The Union Jack, the Union of Jacob. Well, if you look at the overhead of the Vatican, you'll see, just Google it right now, overhead, like Vatican images overhead, and you'll see a Union Jack around the monolith. I'm sorry, not monolith. What do they call those things? Obelisks. It's a monolith. It's a monolith, really. And around the monolith,
there's an Egyptian symbol, the phallus.
Right. So there's a deep history. I mean, British allegedly means people of the covenant, right? And so there's all these layers to it. And what you have to do to peel back these layers is to learn a lot of history, which is very interesting. And I wish they would have taught this sort of thing in school, because I would have been way interested in it. But now that I even understand its relevance to life, I'm even more interested. Like, this is a survival sport we're playing here. This is a thinking exercise that is the game of life, and it is a survival sport. And the people running this place, obviously, they're just like watching us die for entertainment. So I'm saying,
right. And whether they're Jesuits or by any other name, their philosophy, their ideology is the same.
Yes,
Right?
the
It's
philosophy is
crowd
out
control.
of death, destruction, and chaos.
Right.
Yep, that's right.
Right.
Now, I'm thinking this will be a good point since now we got back to the general area of, there's a corrupt philosophy, there's a corrupt group of people who are organized. They go through many different groups that intertwine and network together and overlap. And to get to know some of these groups, we're going to have to look through history. And to do that, we're probably going to need some books, which brings us to Luis's book list, which I have here under the document cam. And I'm going to hold a copy in my hand so I don't have to take it out from under the document cam. So what he's got here is a list of books that I believe he already owns, and he had questions about the best order to read them in, books that go together, this sort of thing. So I haven't looked at this too much beforehand, but let me start from the top right here, if you guys can see that. Oh, actually, I have to point. My mouse doesn't show up. I'm going to start over here. And you have People's History of the United States, 1492 to present. So that's a Howard Zinn book, if memory
Which
serves.
we have, right?
I have that book. It was one of the first books that I had started reading. Let me get my mouse back over here. So it's an easy book to acquire. It's available on Barnes & Noble, this sort of thing. It's interesting, but it's just there to let you know that history exists that you're not being taught in school.
Right.
The history you need to understand to figure all this out is not in that book. So you don't really need to read that book, in my opinion, up front, unless you are not convinced that there is some history that you need to learn that you haven't been taught in school. Dumbing Us Down, The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling. I would read that probably in my early pile. You should get that under your belt pretty quick. Fire in the Minds of Men, Origins of the Revolutionary Faith by James H. Billington, who was also a Librarian of Congress, who is also a Rhodes Scholar. That's a fantastic book. It's a must-own for anyone who's serious to research this sort of thing about what's going on in life and how we got here. It contains all the information you need to see that the secret societies are credible, that the Illuminati and the Jacobins had everything to do with the revolutions, that they used the Phrygian cap symbolism, that there's a cult of Pythagoras. There's all these things in that book. He goes into B.F. Trentowski on page 243 and how he created the word cybernetics in 1843. I think it's page 243. Anyway, so that's a very good book, but it was one of the first books that I got, let's say, 6 years ago when I started turning the corner from looking on the internet and wondering if this stuff's going on to, I know something's going on. I have all this evidence, and now I need to find the right books to be able to communicate to other intelligent academic people so that they can see the credibility in this, because they weren't going to get it from the books about the books, which is what I read the first couple years, right? You read, someone who read Tragedy and Hope, and they wrote a book about it called How the World Really Works. Well, that's an interesting book, but it just means you need to get into Tragedy and Hope. So they're like little, starter steps.
It's more meaningful coming straight from Quigley.
You've got The Evolution of Civilizations, The Anglo-American Establishment. These are both Quigley books. Evolution of Civilizations is an excellent book because what Quigley is showing you is the repeating patterns through history, that civilizations rise and they fall and they rise for certain reasons, and then at a certain point they get too heavy for themselves and they collapse under their own weight. And so you can see what stage we are in right now in this world. And
you could go ahead, combine some money some books. Oh my goodness! But there's a couple books that outline that same pattern. Similarly, but from a monetary standpoint, as to like how civilizations would crash from outstretching their own.
I think The Lost Science of Money is Zarlenga's book, the yellow book.
Yeah, Zarlenga's one, but there's a couple. It's just interesting because the evolution of civilization, you kind of see the same sort of pattern from like the monetary perspective. That I just had to cut in and say that.
Yeah,
because it's a very consistent pattern.
Yeah, and we have to define civilization as well. There's a
yes, good point.
Are we talking about
colonization,
civilization based on general principles inscribed in pieces of paper? Are we talking about Anglo-Saxon civilization? Like, what's the moniker for the judging of that
Will Durant
terminology?
had a great definition of civilization. I wish that I had it in front of me right here to read.
Yeah, I agree. Yes,
look it up. I'll buy you some time. Yeah. All right, so going down the list, you've got Trivium Mastery. That's not a book that I would recommend for, I don't know. The Trivium, the yellow book?
Who wrote Trivium Mastery?
Well, I have it here. Hold on.
Sister Miriam Joseph?
No. Trivium, Susan.
The Well-Trained Mind.
All right, hold on. I can't see it from...
Yeah, while he's looking for that, I would just add to the Fire in the Minds of Men. a book that I did not see on this list here, and that one's The Illuminati Manifesto of World Revolution, 1792, by Nicholas Bonneville. And this has just been brought into English by Marco de Lucchetti. And you can find that book on Amazon, and it brings forth a lot of the more recent information and translations about Nicholas Bonneville's role in the French Revolution and the social circle.
Yeah, they go well together. So how about that? I'll cover some of the books that go well together instead of the going down the list straight with every book. So for instance,
First,
go ahead.
Will Durant's definition of civilization. Civilization is social order promoting cultural creation. 4 elements constitute it: economic provision, political organization, moral traditions, and the pursuit of knowledge and the arts. It begins where chaos and insecurity end. For when fear is overcome, curiosity and constructiveness are free, and man passes by natural impulse towards the understanding and embellishment of life. Now, that's a great definition.
That's the liberal definition of civilization, I think.
Right.
Something more Kevin would be able to
Right,
give
because,
a little more context for.
what I was going to say is I think that the elite would define civilized differently. For example, when they're colonizing various countries, right, they're like, oh, these people are uncivilized. But those people have come together for common purposes and with common values
with their own
and morals.
values, right,
and right, and they are. And anyway, so.
All right, so on the topic of the trivium, there's the standard Sister Miriam Joseph's the Trivium, Liberal Arts of Logic, Grammar, and Rhetoric. That's a standard text. There's a lot of the text that isn't daily applicable, but you should read through it anyway. There's also a book that's not on this list that's Increasing Academic Achievement Through the Classical Trivium by Randall Hart, Ph.D. I call it the Blue Book because the Sister Miriam Joseph book is a yellow book, the Hart book is a blue book, and Metalogicon, that's more for appreciating the fact that this argument of using logic and reason is not a new one. That a guy 1,000 years ago, John of Salisbury, is having this same defense of logic and reason, trying to save his friend Thomas Becket from being beheaded, and that beheading of the Archbishop of Canterbury is what causes the schism between King John and the Vatican. How about that full circle? That wasn't really intentional, but I like it. That's the magic of making media. All right.
Synchronicity.
Shadows of Power, Ascent of Money, Grand Chessboard. These are all good for the global power structure. So Shadows of Power is Council on Foreign Relations and the American Decline by Dr. James Perloff.
Great book.
This is like a quiz because there's no authors on here, Luis. Sorry.
What book was that again? Sorry.
Shadows of Power.
Shadows of Power. That was also in a Peace Revolution episode a couple episodes ago where Perloff was doing the lecture. I have the book, but I like the lecture too because there's some things in there that I didn't see in the book. The Ascent of Money is Niall Ferguson. Now, the reason that's important is Niall Ferguson is the official biographer of the Rothschild family. He does he's first off, he's a Rhodes Scholar. So he's a Rothschild scholar. When you follow back Rhodes funding and all that stuff, he's a Rothschild scholar, which is why he's the official biographer of the Rothschild family. Tragedy and Hope, The History of the World in Our Time. War is a Racket, The Profit Motive Behind Warfare. Those go well with The Old Boys, Anglo-American Establishment, and Evolution of Civilizations. When you get fire in the minds of men, like Kevin said, you do the World Manifesto or World Revolution by Marco de Lucchetti. And that takes us through the first page. And the back page is, I had None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen highlighted here. That is a little tiny, I actually have it right here probably. It's a pocket book. Here, I got a couple of these pocket books.
Pretty much a lot of the stuff in Tragedy and Hope, but condensed.
Well, that's what happened is, let's see. None Dare Call It Conspiracy, Under the Document Camp, How You Like Me Now. There you go. All right, so this is one of the first books I got. I got it used back, 2004. So when I say one of the first books, conspiracy books, trying to find, is there legitimate content that can be accessed to answer some of the questions that you have when you first, kind of wake up and start looking into these things, right? And so one of the easier ones to get in a used book market, because it's everywhere, is the None Dare Call It Conspiracy. But I also got with it Rockefeller, The Truth About Rockefeller, Public Enemy #1, and it's written by a guy named Emmanuel M. Josephson. So Jesus M. Josephson. Jesus is Joseph's son. I thought that was maybe a pseudonym, a clever pseudonym. All right, and then there's one more, which there's one more with the black cover, which escapes me right now. It's the Rockefeller File is what it's called.
That's also Gary Allen.
Right. Okay, so the Rockefeller File. Oh, actually, I do have it here. See, it's only after I remember that I can find it. That one. And so, for instance, this Rockefeller File book you can pick up for like nothing, and it substantiates the fact that the Rockefellers exist, that they have a lot of power, that they diversify their power, and they continue to make a lot of trouble, as does this book. None Dare Call It Conspiracy. Yeah, it is a recap of kind of a short pocketbook version of Tragedy and Hope. So it's the type of thing you can take with you if you go get your tires changed or something. You can just read it there and probably get an interesting conversation with some other people. So it's going to break down how the Bolsheviks were, funded by the bankers, how the peace movement was faked, how money's controlled by central bankers, how the United Nations has an agenda, et cetera, right? So these types of small pocket books that are like distillations of the research that exists. Now, if you want a cool pocket book, I'd recommend something like this, Propaganda by Eddie Bernays. It's an excellent book. It's going to shock you in the first couple pages. You won't be able to put it down. It's a real page turner. And I got this book that I just grabbed.
Which is on his list.
It's on the list. So, Leipzig Connection, Basics in Education by Paolo Leone. All right,
Great book.
All right,
Yes.
so now let me tell you, we can say it's a great book, but no one's going to know why till we read something. Let's read something from page 94. 94. Special mention should also be made of the concept of educational reform per se, and its leading exponents in Europe and the United States, especially Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, this disciple of Rousseau and of the Swiss mystical radical and why do you have to throw words in here?
Anti-enlightenment.
Physiognomist. It says Physiognomist. 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 Johann Caspar Lavater, having, as Swiss leader of the Illuminati, first devised a workable system of public instruction for downtrodden children. Now, the socialization of the student, this guy Caspar Lavater, who's the leader of the Swiss Illuminati, it's got a little footnote.
And I think he's wrong.
You think?
Yeah, because I chased down the original source on that. And I think he's referring to Pestalozzi being the Grand Master of the Illuminati of Switzerland. If you it's like he misplaced a comma there.
Okay.
But there's a professor who wrote the source material for this, and his name is R.M. Quick. And you can find his original book on archive.org. I don't have it memorized, but it does have reference to Pestalozzi being in the Illuminati, and then it talks about how he later thought more of or less of it and got out. But when you look at Emile and the other things that he wrote, it's all during the period of time when he was in the Illuminati, and he was a friend. See, not that it matters if it's Pestalozzi or Lavater, because Lavater was a close friend of Adam Weishaupt and spent many summers at his house when he was young. They knew each other very, very well, except Lavater kind of went off on the irrational kind of Kantian view, and they wrote things back and forth against each other in public. So Lavater they recruited mesmerists, they recruited all kinds of different people to be in the Illuminati. So I would not be surprised at all if Lavater himself was a main player, being that he worked with Pestalozzi at the time of the Yverdon school and all of these orphan schools where they're taking these children that quote unquote nobody else wanted and trying to fashion Rousseau's ideas onto their mind.
Well, they were definitely experimenting on them.
Is the Rousseauian idea, is that anti-enlightenment movement, or has that come out of that, or is that something different?
That's a whole nother episode on the social contract, but there is a playlist on my YouTube page, and there's 20 different classes. It's 20 sequential classes on Rousseau and the social contract.
Oh, the social okay, sure.
It's really good.
Okay, so page 9 of Paolo Leone's The Leipzig Connection, and this is a different title than when it was originally printed. It had a more, it's called The Leipzig Connection, The Systematic Destruction of American Education. But you know what? They don't put that on the cover, because I guess it's very incendiary to kind of say the truth. Anyway, from page 9, it's talking about Wilhelm Wundt and the wonderful stimulus response mechanism that these guys had discovered and how they use it. So Wundt's thesis laid the philosophical basis for the principles of conditioning later developed by Pavlov, who studied physiology in Leipzig in 1884, 5 years after Wundt had inaugurated his laboratory there. And American behavioral psychologists such as Watson and Skinner for lobotomies and electroconvulsive therapy, for schools oriented toward the socialization of the child rather than the development of the intellect, and for the emergence of a society of more and more blatantly devoted to the gratification of sensory desires at the expense of responsibility and achievement. That's like a summary of the 20th century right there. And so there's two angles that I see in relation to these books. There's the vibe of From Prussia with Love, the Trojan Horse in our school system, and there's the From Russia with Fear, the psychology of control. And so the Pavlov system that's developed in Prussia actually becomes a whole different Soviet system where it's all about breaking down the mind of the individual. And so it's a combination of the discipline of the Prussian system and the psycho-cybernetics of the Russian system, where they mix those two in a cocktail, call it the American public school system, and we are no longer self-reliant Americans. We are people who in every way are being driven by stimulus response, complicated propaganda and advertising, and all these other things that we never realize until we stop and think about these things. And then when you think, you're going to need to find some more books. So next on the list, we have America's Secret Establishment, An Introduction to Skull and Bones by Anthony Sutton. Now, Sutton is he is such a great writer that Zbigniew Brzezinski says that if you want to know about the history of Soviet Russia and Western development, you must read Anthony Sutton's 3-volume trilogy. So even the New World Order, like power brokers, say that Sutton is a great historian. In Chapter 8 of the Introduction to the Order of Skull and Bones, America's Secret Establishment book, he talks about how the Order came to control American education. And I have that book. It's a pamphlet. $80 form. See how thin it is for $80? Woo!
$80?
Well, I didn't know back then that it was actually in the other book, and so this is an artifact that I've had for, 7 years. And there it is. And inside it talks all about the Yale people who went over to Prussia, and they came back and spread that virus all over the place that we know as the compulsory version of public schooling, where your free will is taken away and you don't get an education in exchange. So the other book that I would recommend is this dandy book right here. It is called NEA, Trojan Horse in American Education by Samuel L. Blumenfeld. Now, there's a couple books that you want to read on education. You want to read Gatto's books, and you want to read this NEA Trojan Horse book, definitely. You need a little context to understand the value of this book, but
Gatto absolutely read it.
Yeah, he absolutely read it.
I got that in the first 30 pages.
He also, Samuel Blumenfeld, has another book that also goes into the history very well called Is Public Education Necessary?, which was previous to NEA, which I posted to the forums on Tragedy and Hope.
Oh, nice.
And then in addition to this, separately, I would recommend for education, I just reread this recently, not all the way through yet, is Murray Rothbard, Education, Free and Compulsory, which does bring up the Pestalozzi system, which touches on the Jesuits and does a really good objective job without implementing his own opinions on the history of compulsory schooling.
Yeah, the jury, I'm still skeptical of Rothbard. Mm-hmm. When people come along, they're a little too good to be true. I like to just take in as much as I can. So far, he's passed all the tests. I haven't found serious flaws where I'm like, well, I can't listen to this guy. It's a waste of my time.
It's pretty spot on.
Yeah, so he's done his research, and I'm growing to appreciate the finer aspects. As far as other books on here, Franklin Cover-Up, Child Abuse, Satanism, and Murder in Nebraska. Well, we actually kind of talked
Be
about
wary,
that earlier.
because that's very difficult to read. Reading through that book was somewhat, I don't want to say traumatizing, but I mean, especially with my own family and the whole Penn State, like my dad being a big supporter of Penn State and like Joe Paterno, and I just feel like I could between the two. I don't have the evidence, but the system is the same, so it makes complete sense that it would just uproot and move somewhere else. So
Yeah.
May
So
I say something?
go ahead, Darby.
Okay. Well, and one of the things, and I'm just still kind of back on the old thing, but another thing that I seem to see that's a common thread through politics, through Hollywood, because if you're still, if you're looking at from the top down, if you're still going with my theory, I mean, that's what these guys, are kind of famous for, is this whole pedophilia thing, and
go after children. It's all about going after children in any way, shape, and form. They go, if it's a school system or they set up systems to literally attract and abuse them in other ways. It's all,
right.
Or even the idea of Santa Claus, Darby. I mean, where does that come from?
Yeah, right.
So there's a
Well,
whole.
I'm just saying that's been a long tradition with the Catholic Church, and you hear people, like watching something on the rap industry, and I mean they're literally making these guys literally take it up the butt, and they're calling the butt crack the new cleavage. I mean, seriously. So I mean, to me, when you look at the pedophilia, that's just rampant in everything, including that. I think that has got to be,
And speaking with like friends and family that I've known for a long time that come from the Catholic tradition, like just the perversion through culture and television, it's amazing how much our values can change. Learning of media, and I see it everywhere. Those that aren't very conscious of cable television, or not that I watch it often, but when I'm up there, when we're just kind of like chilling out for the end of the night, we turn it on, and it's everywhere. If one is conscious to the machinations, it's quite literal as to what they're trying to normalize as values in our society, and that's pretty much belittling children. Violence against a child is huge. That's something I really agree with Stephen. Violence begins in the home, and we got to kind of stop that first. But that violence is really being imprinted on our own minds, and the way we kind of treat one another with these divide and conquer mentalities, and the way we treat our own selves and our own relationships with our loved ones, whether it be a mom or a dad or a wife or a girlfriend or whatever it be. It's amazing how much they're just trying to. That's why I say, like, the underlying philosophy that's controlling this world, yes, the machinations are going after children mainly, first and foremost, but it's actually just that Terence McKenna used to say, and I'm going to bring him up again, culture itself is pointing you in one direction, and that one direction, what they're trying to do. They're making us all personally kind of, self-destruct by imprinting these kind of values and these habits through the school system or through any other institution that we have to give our energy to in order to get something back to perpetuate our own lives. And
culture, he would say, Terence McKenna would say, culture is not your friend.
It's not your friend.
And you've got to take in some of, the influences that undoubtedly McKenna is drawing on there would be from the Frankfurt School of Philosophy and the critical theory brought in by Theodore Adorno and Herbert Marcuse and Max Horkheimer, who are very influential. Check out the New School of Social Research and what was called University in Exile. And this new critical theory they brought in, funny enough, William McCulloch of the American Cybernetic Society and the Macy conferences, a cyberneticist, accused them of being Freud's epigony, the modern-day Illuminati. So it's interesting to look at some of the parallels between some of the philosophies that were brought in during World War II and how that affected the counterculture movements, quote unquote, and the different feedback loops that were being created by cybernetic culture and the new version of cybernetics through these entheogens and different substances.
McKenna is a perfect example of that. I'll get off the Terrence thing, but right after this. But I just have to say, if you read a lot of his later works or a lot of his essays later on in his life, it's all about creating a sort of like technologically based culture. He'd oftentimes say that the mushroom would say maybe we're like a sort of hive mind moving towards just creating machines that are trying to. I mean, it was very interesting. You can tell now it makes complete sense, who his influences are now that we have more context for the philosophy that they were trying to implement, especially after World War II and the whole technology and cybernetics movements that were kind of perpetuating or manifesting heavily at that time because the technology was finally there. So it's very interesting because you see it all over his works, especially the kind of merging with technology all the time. It kind of moves towards that transhumanist ideal, but he himself he was still about empowering the individual. So that's where I always say, like, he wasn't like an actual agent or something. He was just kind of naive and didn't do enough general grammar history into the people he was taking some of these philosophies from. So
perhaps, yeah.
Perhaps, yeah.
Perhaps. All right, so there's a weapons of mass instruction, school teachers' journey through the dark world of compulsory schooling. I would recommend that. It's not as important as Underground History of American Education, and you only really need to read Dumbing Us Down if you're not convinced you need to read Underground History of American Education. If those books sound daunting, just watch the Ultimate History Lesson, or have your loved one or family or the person you care about check that out, because that's the easiest way to go. People can watch a video. Now, granted, we probably do need to cut some trailers and some samples and do something to get people interested in watching a 5-hour movie. I haven't done a very good job of that yet. We've just kind of left it to the heavy-duty researchers, and, I have more work to do.
But we'll get there.
We'll get there. There's Atlas Shrugged on here. Now, Atlas Shrugged is a huge book, and it contains a lot. It's a fictional book. It contains a lot of rhetoric. And if you are actually interested in objectivism or learning what Ayn Rand had written so you can improve upon it and take its imperfections and leave the arbitrary behind, I would start out with... can I see the book?
What, Anthem?
No. I would start out with objectivist epistemology.
Oh, okay.
I would start out with the Ayn Rand lexicon. I would actually read...
He has the lexicon on here.
Okay, he's got the lexicon. Cody, you've got the lexicon too, right?
Yes, Lexicon's fantastic.
Yeah, Lexicon is a brilliant
but,
book.
But do be wary of New School objectivism, because they're totally for military intervention. So the whole Ayn Rand Institute today has really gotten taken over. There's actually an anti-Ayn Rand Institute picking out that crap. But there's still so much, as Richard has pointed out, to get from it, especially lexicon definitions from all different points of view. Is so.
And you don't have to take the definitions as your own, but it's just interesting to see how these words are defined and interrelated concepts. And there's a clear line between logic and reason and irrationality, and you can find the dividing line through reading those definitions. So I think that's a lot more useful than trying to read a 1,200-page book like Atlas Shrugged, because really, if you
Galt's speech,
I was just going to say, there's 60 pages in there that's John Galt's speech that we had put in an earlier Peace Revolution. This is John Galt speaking, maybe episode 32, something like that. You can find it pretty easily online. It is 60 pages, so it would probably take you 3 hours, to read through it. But that is worthwhile. That is the first coherent explanation. I don't agree with everything that's in there, but it's the best start I've seen at a coherent description of this in English. So I think there's a lot to be learned from just reading that 60-page excerpt from Atlas Shrugged. Plus, they're also coming out with the second part of the movie that I'm sure will have that speech in it. It's the whole reason they made the movie. The Secret Destiny of America by Manly Palmer Hall and the Lost Keys of Freemasonry. I'd also recommend America's Secret Destiny by Manly Palmer Hall. You can get all his MP3s online. There's like 700 hours of them. We've had them for like 10 years. And they're just cool to listen to when you're riding in a car someplace. Like if we drive someplace, you can just pop on a lecture. And he's never pushing his opinion or his beliefs. He's a very cool cat when it comes to doing the lecture and writing the books. He's just somebody who, grew up in an interesting situation. He did end up joining the Masons because they didn't want him to do any more writing about it. He died in a horrific, awful way. Yes. He was murdered. If you want to know about that, you get this book called The Master of the Mysteries by Louis Sahagan. Sahagan.
Master of the Mysteries.
Yeah.
How you spell last name?
Sahagan. Louis Sahagan.
I've never heard of that. I didn't know.
I read that book.
And it was ritualistic. and stuff. I mean, when I was up in Connecticut and I was reading through that book, like I didn't believe it myself, which I oftentimes don't with Rich, just to provide a little force. And he's like, "Oh, read the book," and I'm like, "Okay," and I do, and I didn't put the damn thing down. And I just kept reading. I'm like, I could not believe this is what happened to him. The way it happened, especially what I know about health, I'm like, oh my god, like what they did to him that's torture. So.
Yeah, it was a ritual killing. So if you want to, if people out there talk shit all the time on Manly Palmer Hall without like reading him or listening to him first, all I'm saying is check out his stuff objectively. You can just read you don't have to become the words. You don't have to become the book. You can hold it in your hand and check it out and read it, and you can discard it if you think he's full of shit. I'm saying that guy he was in the middle of a ton of interesting esoteric information, and they were using him. He didn't realize he was being used. But the poor guy gets used his whole life and then ritually sacrificed, and then they stole everything that he had post-death.
Wow.
So it's a tragic story. And I think if he was a really evil dude, or like if he was a bad guy, like they wouldn't have done that. They preyed on him clearly because he was a weak guy that they could prey on. So that brings me to... I'll cover the rest of these, but I just did want to talk at the end because Jordan Maxwell had always claimed that he was mentored by Manly Palmer Hall and had this whole library given to him and all this other stuff. But we'll talk about that at the end when we're after I get through the business here. All right, so The Fountainhead is on here. I don't know if I'd read the book.
Movie.
I would watch the movie.
Yeah.
I would watch the movie.
Right.
Yeah, the movie's good.
Sure.
I mean, Howard Rourke, who's the architect who won't compromise with, people who don't think, basically. There is something to that, but then again, like that's a very harsh example that I think is almost unrealistic to follow. It's a fictional movie, so it was just Ayn Rand's way of trying to get her ideas in front of audiences. She did a well enough job that she could later write books on what she wanted to and not have to fictionalize and storyboard everything, but... continuing on the list, Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21 by Rosa Quarry. I don't have the book, but I have seen most of her lectures. She's an excellent speaker. She's very well informed. I can only imagine that the book would be useful in understanding the documentation and legitimacy behind Agenda 21, at least in its existence, not in reality. It's not legitimate in reality, but it does exist. And they are irrational, and they are taking away everyone's rights and changing things. And the towns, from what I understand, I mean, looking at people who are on town councils, they think they're coming up with all these ideas on their own about sustainability. It's just like in the Peace Revolution episode with Peg Luksik, Luksik. You'll find that on YouTube. Where she's talking to these Pennsylvania, school parents at like a PTA meeting, and she's like, "We had to create all these rules, and then we found out all these other states thought they created their own rules too, but all the rules are the same. So it's the same type of top down, but they make it look like it's grassroots in your community sustainability, right? So that's very.
So it's our faults, or it's our problem, but no, it's all not coming from a central, central organization or a central ideology or central philosophy. That's point. That's the 1,000 layers of complexity God is talking about in the ultimate history lesson, right? It's just essentially creating so many layers. You can't trace back the cause and effect or nature of what's going on. There's just too many variables. So they kind of just you remain in the state of chaos, and that's kind of the way they keep us compartmentalized and controlled. That's an important. That and the Amtssprache, if you combine the idea of official language, the idea that my superior above me told me to do it,
Yeah, right.
Well, you combine those two things. I mean, you have combined in the behaviorism as well. You can see how perfectly they create systems for control. I mean, it all perfectly.
It's all about control of human resources. Right.
We are the tax cattle.
Yeah. Speaking of tax cattle, the next book is Creature from Jekyll Island. The Creature from Jekyll Island. I would not recommend that book as the first read. I would
Secrets of the Federal Reserve.
I would recommend Eustace Mullins's Secrets of the Federal Reserve, which you can find probably on eBay. And it's a good read. It's a shorter book. It's more substantial. It has primary sources.
It's packed full of information. You can get what some of these massive books we're reading way more out of that tiny little book.
And he was
just because you're following the history of money.
He was a researcher at the Library of Congress. He was literally living there
right
for several years.
And taught himself to speed read in order to be able to write down all that information
Well,
and like he lived there. He actually slept, I think, around the area or in the area. Like it was just weird.
And who
weird
told
situation.
him? Who asked him? Who gave him the mission to write that book? But Ezra Pound. And when you investigate what Ezra Pound was about and how he was persecuted, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. You don't get that with the creature from Jekyll Island. You don't get that. You get this. Here's this little story, but it doesn't connect into all this other stuff that is there. And I think Eustace Mullins does a good job of marshaling the resources that are found in the Intimate Papers of Colonel House by Charles M. Seymour. Because the most damning quotes in his book, in my opinion, are all the ones that are on the 4-volume set on the shelf behind me from Colonel House. And so it really gives you an idea of the connectivity between Woodrow Wilson and his handler, Colonel House, and then you can get into someone like Benjamin Friedman to see who handled Colonel House, and that was Samuel Untermeyer. And then you can read the Warburg books to see that the Warburgs handled Samuel Untermeyer and sometimes Colonel House directly. So there is a chain of causality that is there in a history, but you're not going to find that in The Creature from Jekyll Island. Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong. I own that book. It's James Lowell who wrote that book, I believe. It's good if you don't know anything about Gatto. If you don't know that Gatto and Samuel Blumenfeld exist, you might want to read that book because it's at Barnes & Noble.
Actually, you should take that book in America BC or something in its ancient origins. You can get a lot out of like kind of a different way of developing culture, really, in a completely different mindset. And because you see the same sort of patterns even here, but way earlier in history with the American Indians, for example, a lot of the symbolism comes from ancient India, and there's a literal architecture and evidence to show that artifact. So it's a very interesting history. And if you take America BC, its ancient origins, I think it's the book, and combine that with The Lies My Teacher Told Me, you kind of find it a little interesting. Like, all of a sudden, a lot of the myths that have been pervaded through the schooling system kind of start to break down, but not so much that people can't deal with it. It's not like you're inundating them with facts about historical illusions that are just too much. This might be a good way to at least break the ice on certain topics that wouldn't be too much for someone to take in. I don't know. That's my little perspective.
Speaking of breaking the ice on certain topics, I just tried to pull up Jordan Maxwell's site to see if it was still like it was earlier this week. And when you type in Jordan Maxwell, I'll do it again. It said master defrauder up here in the URL. So let me see if I can do this again.
I gotta check this out.
It was on there the first time I did it. Let me maybe if I try a different page.
Esoteric Scholar.
It's not going to that first page for me.
Maybe I had a cached.
Yep.
Maybe I had a cached page. All right. Well, let me just go with the story then, since that didn't work out. Earlier this week, we got an email, and this email was from this guy Joe D. And Joe D had been sending out email on behalf of Jordan Maxwell for at least, I don't know, past year and a half, something like that, right? So we'd usually just get the email and delete it or whatever. And this time he had a big message, and basically he was saying that he had some problem with Jordan. And so, I clicked the link on the site, and the whole site was gone. And it was just like Jordan Maxwell, master defrauder, like, and recounted the whole story, and it was just this whole mess. Well,
the email said jordanmaxwell.com for sale, please read.
So he was asking $50,000 for the site, and I thought that was kind of a joke to tell Jordan to just go, F off, like, I'm going to sell your site and no one's going to buy it, so you're just not going to have it. So the issue was there were all these shenanigans that went on, and this guy who sent the email seemed like the innocent character, and that he had been kind of conned by Jordan Maxwell. And then he had discovered all this stuff about Jordan, and when he confronted Jordan, Jordan basically freaked out and acted, kind of predatory. So it was interesting because almost verbatim what this guy was saying happened to him is the same thing that Jordan was, saying back in 2007, 2008. So it was interesting because everyone always asks, like, why don't you guys work with Jordan Maxwell, or why don't you talk about his work, all this stuff. Like, well, first off, Russell Pine is who Jordan Maxwell is. Russell Pine is his name. And the way we figured that out was we were trying to book an airline ticket for him to go to Vancouver for the premiere of Hijacking Humanity, and he was all set to go, and we went to book the ticket, and he's like, yeah, why don't you book the ticket under Russell Pine? And I was like, well, who's that? He's like, well, and he'd already given me his information as Jordan Maxwell,
for us to book the ticket.
book
We already
the
had
ticket.
the information to book the ticket, but then he called back and asked
so then I'm
for us
like,
to do it under Russell Pine.
who can book tickets under two different names? Like, this was post 9/11 world, and I'm like, who has passports in two different names? And I was like, and that plus all the other shenanigans and he's what do you call it when you pity yourself and your victim mentality, and it's just always like, if the guy's in a hole and you throw him a rope, he would rather pull you in the hole than climb out. Like, he wants nothing to do with climbing out. He just wants someone to be happy in the hole with him, and it's like, that's not what we do. So there were several overlaps between this idea of who controls the world, the Vatican, the Jesuits, all these things. A lot of these are contained in what Jordan presents as his work. But as it turns out, I don't think he's really been studying this stuff for 50 years like he claims. I mean, so there's a lot yet to be verified. And so now it's a measure of having to go through Jordan's work and figure out what's real and what's not, and what can be used or referenced, or what we have to delete in our minds as an arbitrary idea. And, it's interesting to see his site back up, and I don't know how that all worked out, but those emails were flying back and forth earlier this week.
The explanation page isn't there anymore either.
The guy in the email had said he was going to put it up for auction, just not to Jordan Maxwell, but for anybody else.
Yeah, it was up because we clicked through all the links because I was interested in, avoiding such pitfalls. So I was like, let's learn from this guy going through it. And, so Jordan had claimed to be a student of Manly Palmer Hall when I talked to him, because I talked to him, for many, many, many hours over a series of weeks that probably was spanning, 8 to 10 to 12 weeks, like November through January of 2007 and 2008. And I was really excited, and we had Jordan like in our business plan, like as far as production and trying to get people to understand what's going on. And he kept telling me how he's got all this valuable information in storage, and if he could just get a couple assistants to help him get it on the web. And so these are all enticing things to a young researcher who's trying to figure out which way is up, basically. And so I bought into it for several weeks, and he was living there with his brother at the time, and we even had a friend who was going through town stop in and meet with Jordan at his place to see if it was legit or not. And we didn't really get a lot of good feedback from that. So we started to, you start to notice the contradictions, then the contradictions turn into patterns, and then the patterns stack up, and then at some point you're going to be like, well, he's not like us.
Well, it's good that he pulled out, and we didn't get any further entangles with him.
Well, he pulled out because we weren't going to get him a ticket, and that was the end of that.
Yeah, I remember a little bit of that when I first met you, and it was really surprising for someone like me who wasn't very familiar with Jordan Maxwell. I mean, besides, I had definitely heard a couple of radio interviews he had done and looked over. I know he has so many different documentary films and books and whatnot, but I had looked over some of his information. I found it, interesting. I thought Jan Irvin did a much better job in that category or realm of knowledge, but at the end of the day, like when I heard the stories you're presenting to me, it made a lot more sense as the person he really was, because you can hear it actually in the inflections of the way he speaks to interviewers and the way he gives interviews, the way he presents himself.
Well, it's always the woe is me,
Yes,
I'm Jordan Maxwell, and I'm 80 years old, and people are taking advantage of me, and I need help.
Figured out all of everything,
right?
Like
and so
he has his,
this kid who helps Jordan was like 26 years old. He was making like $60,000 a year. He quit his job. He invested like $100,000 into Jordan and promoting his stuff and getting DVDs made and buying computers and doing all this stuff, right? Running his website, because Jordan would complain to me that somebody stole his website, and they were holding it for ransom, and they were trying to auction it. And he told me the exact same story that this dude was telling, like 5 years later. And so I smell a con job, right? Because Jordan will lay out there that he needs all these things. And I'll tell you right now, like, he ended up moving in with this kid. So picture this, like 26-year-old kid taking care of Jordan Maxwell, who should be able to fucking take care of himself, especially if he's buddy-buddy with George Lucas and all these other people that he throws around, Michael Eisner, all these people, right? So, you know, when you get into his Jehovah's Witness history, I got nothing against Jehovah's Witnesses. I just want to know why why Russell Pine would adopt a different name, put himself into the stream of consciousness that is all this stuff out there when he was, attending Jehovah's Witnesses meetings by other witnesses who were in Jehovah's Witnesses with him, is how, like, we all found this out. And when I mentioned some of this stuff to Jan, when we had discovered it back in like 2008, he's like, I already knew that. I discovered Russell Pine a couple of years ago. And so it's just sometimes that we don't talk to each other about what we have figured out, because I'm sure that, you know, we haven't probably mentioned the Jordan Maxwell experience. So if we haven't told you what we figured out, there could be someone in our subscriber audience who's like, oh, I'm going to help Jordan. You know, he really needs help. I could really help him out. You know, it's nice helping you guys, but I feel like I could really help Jordan. So I just want to make sure that we at least know from our own experience that this has been going on, that he bumped into Jan found out about it, and then we figured it out, and then we didn't know this guy Joe D at all. You know, I don't want to go broadcasting this stuff. It's not my business, but
There's one river for Jordan Maxwell with a lot of inlets flowing into it, and these inlets, you know, pretty much define his character in multiple different ways. But it's funny because each one found a different aspect of Jordan Maxwell. It's definitely some science guy, but all from different areas, from different angles of research. So it just corroborates what we already kind of know to be about.
Well, and it's not
what
just
he
him
is in his own disposition.
Because the other guys that were named in there were people that he, like Jordan, had been running cons with since the early '90s, and so the other
Sleeping
people
out of his office,
right? And so the other guys that came up in this email thread and all the evidence that went back and forth and all this stuff was these other characters who have helped Jordan with, you know, since like 1991, do these types of things. And the one guy had been conned, but now he's in the group and he's helping the con on other people. Like, it was interesting and somewhat complex, but that's not the point. The point is the esoteric nature of where Jordan Maxwell took his name from and what might be learned from that sort of investigation. Because if there is this character out there purporting to be a real researcher and steering people in the wrong direction and taking a bunch of money along the way, then it behooves us to figure out what do the words Jordan Maxwell actually mean, and what is he collecting through his purveying himself like that. So
yeah, that was Madame Blavatsky's Isis Unveiled, where she mentions Jordanus Maximus, and this is where supposedly he takes his name, Jordan Maxwell. And of course, Madame Blavatsky is one of the most prominent people in the Theosophical movement. Take that back to the Society for Psychical Research, and
well, what do you mean by that? Take that back to the Society for Psychical Research. Tell me.
Well, the Society for Psychical Research in England was founded by the Cecil Block, which is by Lord Robert Cecil. And the Cecil Block is what nurtured Lord Alfred Milner to create the Milner Group, based on the philosophies of J.R. Seeley and several other individuals at the time. And this Society for Psychical Research has a direct connection to the Theosophical Society, the World Peace Union, Edward Ginn, one of the largest educational textbook manufacturers in the world, where George Plimpton was the president of this organization, and it was working with Andrew Carnegie in order to set up the educational unity necessary to educate two populations on the same type of curriculum, creating new types of order. But
what he's saying is you hit a nerve when you ask those questions. Like, you actually get to some history through that. Now, wasn't there someone else in the Society for Psychical Research that's like notorious in history, has something to do with Israel, something to do with Palestine, something to do with, the Balfour Declaration? Arthur Balfour was in this crazy Society for Psychical Research. I say crazy because the elites without resistance do go.
I mean, the philosophy is that of mind first, is abstract philosophy. That obviously, abstract philosophies are theories you develop in your mind, and you try to either force things to fit into it, or it either fails. So, you know, whether or not it's an esoteric, self-improvement style theory, or, you know, however they try to roll it out to create this sort of open society. You know,
it's applied eugenics.
Yeah, Henry Sidgwick, who lived from 1838 to 1900, was the first president of the Society for Psychical Research. And the Society for Psychical Research was a nonprofit organization started and funded by the Balfour family, as well as Lord Raleigh, Professor Sidgwick, and the members of the Cecil block, which I talked about earlier, nurturing the Milner
BLOC.
Milner Kindergarten. Now, some prominent members of this would include Gilbert Murray, who is the father-in-law of Arnold Toynbee, and Frank Podmore and Edward R. Piazzi. R. Piazzi is
Podmore and Piazzi were
Fellowship of the New Life,
Fabian Socialists.
the Fellowship of the New Life, created by Thomas Davidson, the Scottish English scholar who came to the United States and nurtured John Dewey, Harris out of St. Louis, the Prussian education model, the confluence.
William Torrey Harris.
That's who I was thinking of. The confluence of New England transcendentalism and St. Louis Hegelianism, which is really the untold history of the Prussian education model. And you take that back to Robert Owen and New Harmony, Indiana, where Albion, Illinois was ran by. It started as an English settlement before Illinois became a state, and the founders of Albion, Illinois, nurtured the sale were the signatories of the sale of New Harmony from the Pietist group from Pennsylvania to the new industrialist group and Robert Owen and William McClure, who brought over Joseph Neef and the Condillac de Tracy tradition of French thought at the time. Sorry.
Hey, Kevin.
Yes.
A book that I just posted to Tragedy and Hope before this casual cafe called The Flight from Reality by Clarence B. Carson actually does reference the what you just said, the new
Awesome.
Under his utopian communities. And I just found this diamond in the rough. It's an old foundation for economic education, but it's not about economics. It's about the history of the philosophic corruption of removing cause and effect. And it's a lot of stuff that one lecture, Richard, you included the philosophic corruption of physics. It touches a bit on that, but it also touches on Hegel, and I haven't gotten all the way through it, but it's extremely promising, and I'm seeing a lot of great of these reference points, especially as brought up in the past.
Well,
so
if I cut to page 12 of NEA, Trojan Horse American Education, it says communist colony at New Harmony, Indiana. That was a sentence fragment. The experiment received a great deal of newspaper publicity and attracted a large number of followers. It was called An Experiment in Social Reform Through Cooperation and Rational Education. But in less than 2 years it failed. The problem, Owen decided, was that people raised and educated under the old system were incapable of adapting themselves to the communist way of life, no matter how much they professed to believe in it. So what had happened was people wanted to be communists, but they couldn't outgrow self-reliance and do all this stuff for themselves. So the Owenites decided that rational education would have to precede the creation of a socialist society. So it goes through the Owenites and how they started to socialize our schools. Free market favored privatized education, and they go through the Harvard Unitarians, go to Prussia. The Owen claims in his autobiography that the Prussian system was built on his ideas. Dun, dun, dun. I don't know if he's telling the truth. It's acknowledged by the Prussians that you really could not control education until you controlled the teachers and their indoctrination. And then it just goes on to get worse.
And they're talking about the normal schools or the teachers' colleges at the time. That's really the model for Columbia Teachers College, where a lot of this confluence of the Prussian education being disseminated amongst the universities and down to the high school level. It all starts with the Teachers College at Columbia University. It's where you have Alexander Inglis, Elwood P. Cubberley, James Russell, Nicholas Marie Butler, the head of the Pilgrim Society. You can go on and on and on.
Right.
John Erskine, the Great Books tradition, more to come.
So it's not just the ultimate history lesson with John Taylor Gatto or his books. It's not just Samuel Blumenfeld. It's all through Cubberley's books, Inglis's books, all the primary sources of all the people that Gatto refers to. We went and got those books of the people he's talking about. And it's worse than what he says. Like he's using words, he's using phrases like justified sinners. And, that's not a phrase that Calvin used. It's an accurate description after reading, 30 yards of books of what they're doing. They're coming up with ways to justify what we see as sinning. What they tell us is sinning, they're just finding a way to justify it.
It's a philosophic justification for why their will is the why their will or their is
meant to be manifested on us.
It's an extrapolation of predestination. The idea that you can commit these acts and then still be accepted under these these terms. So he very clearly talks about ideas surrounding the phrase justified sinning. It's all about the nature of the soul after life, as if this guy could possibly interpret that for somebody. But he had a lot of followers, and this philosophy is picked up with pragmatism. It's talked about in the Illuminist circles. It's it's really just do as thou wilt. It's whatever you can do to justify it from the pedestal.
Now, where would they get that idea? Would they get that idea from a place that takes over like the Roman government buildings and builds a religion and then says, hey, we've got this thing called indulgences, and if you give us your hard-earned money, we will give you a slip of paper that gets one of your relatives out of hell for free.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not really for free. You got to give your hard-earned money. In fact, you don't have money. You're going to have to take your cows and sheep and go over to this guy to get the money to give to us. But if you give that money to us, we will give you this piece of paper that says, get out of hell for free. Use it for yourself.
Really?
Use it for a loved one. That's called that's the first form of paper money outside of Babylon, as far as I can find, because Babylon had paper
I've never
money.
heard of that.
Babylon had fractional reserve lending.
Oh yeah, they taught us that in Catholic school, left and right. Indulgence, hell.
Dude.
I mean, that was from 5 years old. I remember
moral currency.
That's a good scam. And then Henry VIII is like, look, I can set up my own racket called the Church of England, the Anglican, the English religion, right? Which is just English is based on Latin, and Latin is controlled by the Romans. And so you do have a colonization, a very clever form of colonization that goes on, because they let countries fight like they're going to be free.
That's really fascinating, because if you take it to the Latin tradition, what about the tradition in the Eastern tradition, which goes to Russia, rather, and then you kind of have this like Western-Eastern split. Does that go back to the church split? It's really interesting. Just to,
why is it split? What is the difference?
The Eastern Orthodox tradition is essentially how the Russian.
And there's
Russia
mushrooms in that
developed from
tradition
the Vikings. Too. Yeah, right.
And then if you go back to the Epistle of the Renegade Bishops, which is talked about in Jan's book, The Holy Mushroom, if you don't read the rest of the book, read only the part about the Epistle from the Renegade Bishops, because at one point these bishops were hanging out, having their meeting, tripping balls, and the Holy Mushroom appears before them, and they see fit. This is why you shouldn't write letters while you're tripping. They wrote letters to all the other churches in Christendom, and they're like, hey, we saw the Holy Mushroom. It appeared to us like, whatever, 20, 40 feet tall in front of us, and they all saw it together, and they had some mystical, trippy experience. But then they made the mistake of hitting the send button. And now we have evidence of it today, and it shows up in Jan's book, and it's like, hey, look at this. Like this exists in history, and it was sent in multiple letters. So it's not just like one letter. Like it was sent to all these different churches.
How interesting is it that all these philosophies are kind of based off of mystical traditions, especially a lot of what Kevin was just saying. It reminds me of the American Way series that Brett Venant did, and he pinpointed. I want to say the Nazis were nihilists or atheists or whatever they were, but honestly, they're extremely mystical. And the people designing our systems for education and otherwise, our military, whatever it be, they're mystical. And however you want to define mystical, but it's a sort of direct experience. That's why pragmatism, the will, the power, they're just essentially, if you can use your will to control another human being, that's doing something in reality, and that's good enough for truth. That's just good enough. So that is what truth is, and it's just the will, which relates to your own power over other individuals. And
they had that movie, The Triumph of the Will. It was propaganda. What you have is, it's when you the fallacy is to look at the Nazis without the context of all their other connections to history. The Nazis are bad. The truth is worse. The truth is that there were people that were funding the Nazis and funding America and funding all the sides at the same time. That's worse than Hitler,
willing to
still
align
here.
with them right up until World War II.
Right. Now the Vatican had concordats. These are contracts that the Pope would cut with Hitler and the Nazis. Right. So there's all, but Hitler also had German officers.
Ruck's one book.
So
Karl Ruck.
What we know is we haven't been told the truth, and what we have to figure out is which parts of the truth do we have, and which parts are part of the story that's used to distract all of us, because the mysticism that ties in innately through all the history, because it's about occulting useful knowledge to gain power and information gap, power gap. It's all the same thing. It's how they rule us. So as long as they can create these useful gaps to them that are dividing and conquering us, like, we are going to continue to repeat history, and that is not our goal. Our goal is to learn history so it doesn't repeat.
My friends, I've got to sign off for the evening, so I appreciate the conversation.
We actually all have to sign off, Cody. So this has been a great conversation, and we are going to continue later this week with a coverage of DVD 4 from Cybernetics student Umpleby, who's a student of Von Forrester, and we're going to knock some proverbial heads around. It is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot of fun with that, and because if we didn't have fun, it would be really dry content. But he's left us some really, really beautiful nuggets, diamonds in the rough that we need to take out and chip and make them sparkle. But it's there, and I'm confident with the conversation that we plan on having. People will likewise see what we've seen from viewing that perspective in context of everything else. So this is kind of to be continued, but it'll be a separate episode, and we'll talk about different stuff. And I got everyone on screen, so if you want to wave to the folks at home, this is the magic of the internet.
I want to see what I look like on the history. Hold on. Let me see.
You can, because the only people who get to see this are the people who are subscribed to the Tragedy and Hope community. So we're among friends, and if we want to wave to each other and watch the delay come through on the other laptop, that's cool.
Darby, thanks so much for coming on the line tonight with us.
Well, thanks, Darby. First, you asked a question. Let's give people the code on how to get on the show. You asked a good question, and then you followed it up. You did research. Then you discovered all this stuff that kind of shocked you, and that's where I'm like, well, it's worth my time, because I don't want you to go through trial and error, thinking you have it and trying to beat down everyone's door with this truth, because that's just one piece of the mosaic, and there are a lot of valid pieces to it. It's not like I'm going to sit here and say this thing that sacrifices children to preserve itself called the Vatican is a good thing. I'm not going to say that. I know what it is, and it is the antithesis to the creative, intelligent force in this universe. That's why churches block out nature. You sit inside an artificial building that blocks out nature, and you listen to one person. So if you don't think there's something to Atwill's work that Christianity's made as a control system, you better get your reading glasses on, because you have a lot of history to review and only your ignorance to lose.
Well, he's not talking to you, Darby.
No,
he's
not
talking
you, Darby.
to the people in general.
Because I don't believe it's a church at all, and
It's not, yeah.
direct counter to some other teachings. I mean, seriously, it's been overtaken. I mean, I think it's like the Borg. I think it's just. But anyway, thank you, and I'm sorry I didn't mean to be chatty, but thank you so much for.
Thank you for being interested, participating.
Yeah, thanks, Darby.
Thanks to everyone at home watching this who funds this show and our ability to do research and produce healthy, nutritious media in a world where they'll pay you to do anything but. If you turn on the TV, get your Ipecac syrup and your Mr. Yuck stickers out, because you're going to deal with a lot of toxins and poison. And unfortunately, this is the highest quality we can do live right now, but in the next 24 hours, we're going to be testing the studio downstairs, and we'll probably do the next history, or the casual cafe from the history episode set, just so we can test everything out and make sure Skype and the earpieces and everything, all the moving pieces that we have to figure out, that we have figured out over the past 6 months.
They were working, but we've had them working several times, and then you make one little
It
adjustment.
has a personality.
5 cameras working at once.
Yeah, so
4 cameras working and everything fails.
we are being persistent. We have not quit yet, and we have solutions downstairs that work to the best of all of our satisfaction thus far. And so then it'll be up to you, the audience, to decide if all of our hard work was worth it. We do have some special surprises coming up. They are additions to what we've told you about the history episode, but it's a piece that allows the history episode to self-market, to communicate to your friends and family in a language and a format, if you will, a metaphor that they can understand and easily internalize. And then they're going to be like scratching their head afterwards thinking about, what did I just watch? Because it's not going to be like anything they've seen before, but it's going to be like everything they've seen before. So while we are putting finishing touches on how to do all that, I'm excited to test out the studio and actually use it and not just troubleshoot it downstairs. And that's it. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you for tuning in and not dropping out, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks,
you guys.
Cody.
Have a good evening, guys.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Be seeing you.